Hello, my name's Rob and welcome to Swift Slots. How did we get here? Well, I'll tell you. If you recall, a few months back, I did a tutorial painting video for Pendle Slot Racing based on their Morris Minor resin body, and that went really well. So I needed to go down the paint shop afterwards and get some more paints. And while I was there, I found an amazing purple metallic paint, and I thought that is so nice. I'm going to buy it and I'll put it for a project, don't know what, but I've just put it in stock. And then I was watching one of my most favourite YouTube channels, Retropower Cars. I've been watching them since the Gordon Murray build, which was about 7 years ago. And if you look at their timeline of videos, that's just about when all their major videos started to happen. So I was watching the end of their video when Project Minor Threat was just being buttoned up and it's pretty much done. And I was watching it with great enjoyment. And then it suddenly struck me. Morris Minor resin body, purple paint, Project Minor Threat. Bingo! So I made a phone call to Pendle Slot Racing and to Retropower Cars, proposed an idea, and here we are. A Minor Threat slot car, all done. So I'm going to show you a quick montage of how I turned the resin body into Project Minor Threat, and then we'll go straight on to the build, and there's a bit of a special bit at the end. But don't skip it, just watch the video through. So let's crack on, let's show you this montage and show you the birth of Project Minor Threat. So as you can see, this kit comes in a very sturdy white box, and on the front of the box we can see the Project Minor Threat. So on opening the box you will find your full kit very nicely wrapped and well protected, and inside the full kit you will get one complete chassis kit. I will open it now and show you. So there is the basic chassis and the front half and the adjustable front axle mount. There are also some spacers there as well. you also get all of the running gear, which includes the motor, the guide, a very nice slotted gear, nice quality silicone wire, and some bearings. You also get a very nice set of alloy wheels, complete with RTO3 tyres, and they are very, very grippy and very, very good. You also get vacuum formed glass, a vacuum formed interior, which are these parts just here. And you also get a very, very nice pair of front headlights, and these are extremely nice quality with lots of nice definition behind the lens. And you also get the water slide decals for the Retropower logo, the Den logo, and also the CB water slides for the front fog lights. And then saving the best until last, you obviously get the Project Minor Threat cast resin body and its associated details. So let's just take a look at this body first. As you can see, it's actually got all of the little parts that the Project Minor Threat has got, from the swollen rear arches, the little rear light lenses on the back of the valance there, the different rear view mirrors, the lack of bumper, no detail on the boot, the very nice fuel filler cap, and then coming around the front we got the swollen front arches, we've got no bonnet hinges, we've got the bonnet vents, and that absolutely iconic face, less the bumper. So we have the very nice grille, spotlights, number plate, and then the slots in the lower valance. And on the inside we've actually got the Retropower logo. So there is the resin body all ready to go. And then also with the body we get this accessory pack as well, which includes the driver's head, obviously there, and we got the two door mirrors and also the wheel centers as well, modelled exactly the same as the Project Minor Threat. So here is the full kit all laid out. So you have the resin body, the resin accessories, the motor, the gearing, the back axles, the full adjustable chassis, silicone wire, guide, bearings, very nice alloy wheels, vacuum formed interior, vacuum formed glass, and then the water slides and the headlights. So that is the whole kit exactly as you get it from the box. So what we'll do now is we'll gather up all the chassis parts and we'll quickly get this chassis put together so that we can move on to painting the body. Okay, so the first thing you're going to need to assemble this chassis is a 0.9 Allen key. Pendle Slot Racing sell a very good one, but there are others available. So the first thing that I like to do when assembling my chassis is to put the bearings actually on the axle first, and then position the bearings into the bearing holders in the chassis and clip the axle down with the bearings like that, all in one place, all in one time, so that it makes the axle nice and smooth. I find putting the bearings in with the axle makes sure that the bearings go down nice and square and they don't sit all crooked. So once you've got your back bearings in, you can simply clip your motor into the chassis, and you do that by lining up the flat on the bottom of the motor with the flat in the back of the chassis, simply lining it up and clipping the motor in like that. So the next job is simply to take your rear gear, put it into the rear space of the car, just like that. Take one of your axles and thread it through the bearings, through the gear, just like that. Make sure the axle's roughly centered, and then gently nip up the grub screw. It's as simple as that, and that is your back end completely finished. So because this is an adjustable chassis, we need to adjust the front of the chassis to match our body, and for this we need to remove 13mm off the back of this front portion here. And the way that I like to do that is to set my digital vernier up to 13mm and simply draw a pencil line across the bottom just like that, and then take a standard pair of side cutters and put them right on that line and just give them a nip on both sides. And then you've got a choice. You can either use a small file and just dress the ends up with a small file, or you can take a piece of sandpaper like this and simply lay it on a flat surface and just drag the piece backwards just like that, and either way will get you a nice square end. So once you've filed down the front half of your chassis we need to think about fitting this very nice accessory that Pendle Slot Racing put in these kits, and that is the adjustable front axle holder. Now you will notice that there's a little lip just here on the front of this little adjuster piece, and that lip goes onto the front of the front section of your chassis. So it goes just like that, and it sits there very, very comfortably. There's no forcing or anything at all. Now it is possible to put this piece on backwards and kind of force it into place and make something happen, but that's not how it works. If you can't just simply place it on like that, then you're doing something wrong. You need to just sort of work out the correct orientation. But that is exactly how it sits. Now how you have to glue, you then have to glue this particular part onto the front of your chassis. So the way that I like to do it is to simply rough up the ends of the front half of the chassis to give the glue something to key to, and then once you've done that on both sides of the front part of the chassis and also the insides of that little adjuster, you can then go ahead and use a dot of super glue to bond the two halves together. Just like that, and then leave the whole thing to dry. So once your front end is fully dried, you are then free to move on to fit the front axle. And the way that you do that is you take the two smallest shims from your shim tree and apply those to the ends of the front axle, and then you can simply screw on your front wheels. Just like that. And then we simply slide the front of the chassis into the rear of the chassis, like that. Now at some point you could glue these two halves together or even put a bolt just in the back there. The bolt isn't supplied with the kit, but it's not needed because when we screw the chassis into the body, we use these two rear fixings here and this front fixing here, which effectively locks the chassis to its correct length anyway. So we don't need to glue the two halves together. We certainly don't want to do it at this point, but you could glue them together if you wanted to at the end of the build. So now the front end is basically finished. We can now pop on the rear wheels just for now, and the final sizes will depend on where the body sits, but we can adjust that later on. Okay, so now we've basically got the chassis up on four wheels, we now need to think about getting our guide set up. And for those of you who don't know how to do this, we simply take the piece of braid and cut it more or less in half, like that. Then if you feed your braid from the top of the guide, you can then slide it down through, and I like to leave about 3mm or 4mm of braid at the top, and then just fold it around like that, and then fold the rest of the braid on the underside like that, and then just repeat for the other side. And you'll end up with the guide looking just like that. We can trim these ends up after we've finished. So once you've got your guide all set up, you need to take your silicone wire and then cut it in half and bare the ends about 10mm. Just like that. And then take one of your brass ferrules and then slide the wire into the ferrule and then fold it over so you end up looking like that. So the next job is to fit a spacer underneath your guide. Now you will see here we've got two spacers on this little tree from PCS, and there's a thin one and a thick one. We actually want the thick one, and we simply take the thick washer and put it on the top of the guide post and push it all the way to the bottom like that. Once you've done that, you can then put your guide onto your chassis and then put your chassis onto a setup plate. And what I like to do is get a toothpick and put a toothpick in the front of that guide and just open up those holes just to make it a little bit easier to fit the ferrules. And the way that I like to fit my ferrules is I take a pair of cranked pliers like this with a smooth jaw, and I like to hold the wire right at the very base like that. Actually, I want to turn him round that way because I do like to put the wire up against the braid, and then with the car actually in a setup plate, push the ferrule into the brass against the setup plate using the pliers, just like that. And the reason why we push against a setup plate is because when the ferrule comes through, it doesn't push all the braid out, and it makes it super neat and tidy on the underside of your guide. So once you've got one in, you can then repeat for the other side. Just like that. And then we can go ahead and then we can screw in the guide screw in the top of the guide. Like that. And the last job to do now is just to solder up these wires to the motor. Okay, so once you've soldered up the motor wire, you can go ahead and just trim these braids to the exact length to the end of the guide, just like that. There, shake off the excess, and there we are. You have a perfectly fitting guide all ready to go. Now you will notice that I put a bit of masking tape over the top of this motor as I was soldering it, and that's just to stop the flux from splashing over onto the steel, because it does tend to discolour the steel when the flux gets onto the steel there. So putting a bit of masking tape over it just keeps everything nice and clean. So once you've trimmed your braids, your chassis is almost completely finished. There's just one job left to do, and that's adjust the front axle. And the way we do that is we lift up these two top grub screws well out the way, and then adjust the bottom grub screws so that when you put the car on a setup plate and you roll the back wheels, the front wheels turn in unison with the chassis. But when you lightly hold the front tyres, you can slip them against the setup plate with very, very little resistance at all. Once you get to that point, you can then do up these top two grub screws so the front axle is free to turn, but there's very, very little horizontal movement at all. And once you've got to that stage, you can call the chassis completely built, and then it's time to move on to painting the body. Okay, so now the chassis is all built up, we can now turn our attentions to painting the body. But I did rather scoot over the differences between the standard Morris and Project Minor Threat. So I'll just take a moment now just to go through as many of those adjustments as I can remember. So obviously we've got widened rear arches, and there's a very, very subtle flare on the outside of those wheel arches. Also, the rear boot hinges have been removed, as well as the little handle that goes across the bottom. We've got the introduction of a filler cap up here and the removal of the filler cap down there. We've also had the entire rear bumper removed and the valance rear profiled. We've also got very different rear lights. We've got these little slits here, which I believe are brake lights on the real car. We've also got the inclusion of two tailpipes as well. Obviously the little recess had to go in first, but that's by the by. Also, in terms of the model itself, the original casting, I've actually removed a lot of the resin in the back of the car to make the centre of gravity a little bit lower, to streamline the body a bit more. And exactly the same in the front as well. A slightly modified front post, but also the removal of all the other bits and bobs that's on the standard Morris, because this one doesn't need them. And also on the front then, we've obviously had the bonnet hinges completely removed. We've had the grills fitted in, and there's 2 rows of 8. Obviously we've got wider front arches, and again there's a very subtle flare on the top of the arch, and you notice how subtly the actual flare is on the front. The front is quite wide, but the flare, the transition from the door to the top of that arch is very, very subtle, and Retropower have done a very, very good job of adding in some really large wheel arches without actually intruding on the body very much at all. Having put the filler on this car and tried to replicate what they've done, you really realize the extent that they've gone to, because it's actually quite difficult to get these arches to flow in nicely without making them look too big. And the drop-offs on the front and the rear of each arch is very, very subtle to make the top of the arch exactly the right width. And there's a little bit of a drop-off at the back and at the front. And as you can see, also the sill line here does flare ever so slightly. Very, very subtle, but it's there. And also, talking of the sill, also they cut the door all the way down to the bottom and taken away this seam line across here as well. That's also replicated on this model. Also, while we're here actually on the door handle has been changed. So you've got a rounded chrome one on the proper car. On Project Minor Threat, you've actually got a black flat handle there. So that's been changed as well. And obviously on the front, where a lot of changes have gone on, removed the bumper, reprofiled the valance, and then we've got two different indicators on the front, and this whole new grille. You got two spotlights. The shape of the grille is completely gone, and also you've got these two vents on the lower valance here, and also the number plate, and it's been debadged on the nose. So there's quite a lot of work that's gone on to this body, and it just makes you appreciate just how much work the actual Project Minor Threat has gone through. Oh, I'm sorry, there's another one there. The pillar for the door, that's also gone as well. So I keep on remembering all these little things. There's a lot of work the Retropower did to the Morris to get it to where it is, and it's not until you create something like this that you really appreciate just how much work went into it. Anyway, so let's move on to getting this body prepped. So I've got a bowl of water here, and I've got some 600 grit wet and dry there, 1200 there, and a little bit of fine Scotch-Brite there. So what I recommend, there shouldn't be too much flash on your body, but just go round the insides of these windows, just taking off any little bits of flash that might still be there. Might be a little bit along there, for example, and then might be a little bit across the back here. And to remove that around the back, I recommend a small file, and you can get down between those tailpipes, and you can just gently just tidy up that rear valance just slightly, just to accentuate those tailpipes. Just go around there and clean up that. And then you might want to just run the file just down the bottoms of those sills, just to flat off the bottom of the sills. None of this will be bad, but this is just a little bit of extra work. And then get your 600 grit wet and dry, and then just go around the inside of those arches, just taking away any little mold line that might still be there. You can also give a flick on the bottoms of the sills as well, just to make sure. And obviously go around the back and just go around the windows. And once you've done all that, you can then go over the outside of the body with a little bit of 1200. Don't go mad. You don't want to be sanding off the detail, but you do just want to scuff the edge of, or the surface of this resin, because this will now be primed after we've done this. So just go around very, very gently and just add a key to the surface of the body. Like I say, don't go mad, because you don't want to be sanding off detail. You just want to add a little bit of a key. And then once you've gone around with your 1200 grit, you can then go around with your fine Scotch-Brite, and that will get into all the little nooks and crannies that you weren't able to get to with the 1200. Again, don't go too mad on this, because we don't want to be sanding off detail. We just want to be surfacing up or scuffing up the surface, ready for primer. Okay, so I'm going to crack on now, and I should get this prepped, and then we'll go straight to primer. Sorry, one thing I forgot to mention was there are actually little bleed posts on the top of this front mount here, and there's two bleed posts on this rear mount. Just trim them down with a flush cutting pliers, and then just trim them up with a scalpel. So once you've finished preparing your body and you've washed it and dried it and got it ready for primer, I like to handle the body with rubber gloves from that point on, just to stop any finger oils from going on the body. Also, I like to make one of these, just a body stand. It's very simply a piece of thin plywood glued and screwed to a post. It's about 4 to 5 inches long, and I just use a piece of plastic on the top, held on with one screw, and then whatever body fixings are relevant to the body that you're holding on it. In this case, it's like that. Now, back 2 screws for this particular body is absolutely fine. This body is not very heavy. I don't have to fit one in the front, so I won't, because I don't want to drill that hole until we get to fit the chassis. But just those back 2 screws are strong enough to hold this body. But if you do happen to have a body fixing hole in the front, you can indeed use it, but I don't need to on this one. But so I would highly recommend making one of these stands, because it makes the job an awful lot easier. And then all you need to do is simply prepare your body in the stand, pop the screw in, and then do up the 2 screws to hold the body in place, and that'll be absolutely great for when you go to primer and in the top coat, and it's also very useful for doing any other stages like small detail work and so on, or even water slides if you've got them to apply to your body, because now you can hold it like that, you can clamp it in the vise, you can move it, and if you have one screw in the plastic fixing, you can hold that in your vise there, and then you can actually turn the body around like that, and you've got good access if you're laying down transfers, water slides, or masking off or anything else. So now we've done that, we're now ready for primer, so let's get to the booth and get some primer on this body. Okay, so now we got our first coat of primer laid down onto the body. I consider this first coat of primer a guide coat because there are so many things that could be wrong with this body that it's difficult to see without a coat of paint on it. But just because there's a coat of paint on your car doesn't mean to say that that coat of paint is a finished coat. So I always put one decent coat of primer on the body straight after body cleanup just to see where I am. And I can see on this particular body here, I've got a tiny little pinhole just there that I need to address. There's a little bit more work I need to do to sort out the bottom of the number plate. Also, there's potentially a little bit of extra work I could do with cleaning up the rear valance just here. I could probably clean up around the exhaust a little bit more. I've got a little tiny there, I'm just peeling it off now with a knife. This little piece here, that could do with coming off. There's a little tiny bit just in there, and there's possibly a little bit across the top of that window there, and so on and so forth. So that's why I put one coat of primer on, just so that I can see where I've got to clean up. So what I'll do is I'll put a little tiny bit of filler in the pinhole, and I'll go around with the sandpaper and clean up all the other parts. And then what I should do is go over the whole body with this 2400 grit wet and dry, or something vaguely similar. But I use this cloth-based sandpaper because it's very flexible and it doesn't put concentration points like ordinary sandpaper can, where it's a hard edge. So this is very soft, and it'll just flat the whole of the primer, because each coat of paint that you put down affects the next one. So if this coat of primer here is nice and smooth, the next coat of primer will go on even smoother and we'll get a good job. So with regards to primer and how we move forward from here, our particular car in this particular job is going to be this 207 metallic purple, because that most closely represents the color of Minor Project. As you can see, it's very, very dark purple, just about spot on. Now, two things about this primer. First of all, I'm going to add a little bit of black primer to my grey primer, because if I put this color down on a light color and the pigment isn't as strong in it as I want it to be, because I've not used this color yet, then I'm going to have to put on a lot of paint on the body to try and get that body of color. However, if I make the base coat a little bit darker, I don't need quite so much paint, and I've got a safeguard. And if the color's coming in nice and quickly, I can just put less coats of this on. So if I start with a darker base, that's going to help me. So that's why you're going to see me put on a slightly darker primer in the next stage. And as you can see, I'm using the Mr. Color range of primers because I find them absolutely fantastic. Now, a quick word about primer. So you will see when I put this on that I will put on one whole coat. And then in fact, I might actually slow the video down to show you. The last coat of primer I'm going to put on is the finishing coat of primer, and that is mainly going to be thinners. So what I do when I do my priming is I spray the bulk of my primer all over the car, and I get a really good layer of primer on there. And when the cup is about 1/3 full, or maybe even a quarter full of the primer, just before I know I'm going to stop, I'll take some of my thinners that matches my paint. In this case, it's the Mr. Color leveling thinner, and I will fill the cup of my airbrush completely to the top. And then with a pipette, I'll suck it up in the pipette and down, up and down, up and down, up and down, to mix all the paint that's on the wall of the cup and the paint that's left in the bottom with the brand new thinners. And then you'll end up with something like 25% paint to 75% thinners. So basically a really, really thin coat. Now the thing with Mr. Color paint is it's a chemical base and it dries incredibly quickly. So by the time I've painted one side, the air will rush over the body and it will come around and it will stick to the backside, and it can make the backside a little bit furry. So, and you can't really get around the body quick enough to keep the whole body wet using a standard mix of 50-50. So the last coat that I do is I make it like 75% thinners, so that I've got a good chance of going around the whole body and getting the whole body completely wet and almost completely saturated really with mostly thinners. And what that will do, if there's any fluffiness from overspray in any part of the body, that fluffiness will melt away because it's now saturated in thinners, and it'll all just sort of melt in, and it will bond the whole paintwork together. It'll tie, the last coat of thinners will tie the whole paint job in because it'll make it flow. Any dry spots will become wet and any wet spots won't matter, but it'll all flow in. So that's how you're going to see me do this. There'll be a slightly darker mix of primer because of the purple base, and then I will slow the video down when I'm putting the last coat on, and you'll see the pure primer coat or pure thinner coat with a dot of primer in there going on as the last coat, and you'll see the whole body will shine like it's gloss because it's all completely covered in the thinners, and there won't be any sort of semi-dry areas. It'll all be nice and glossy. What I'll do is I'll turn it around for you in the camera, and I'll show you that shine all the way around. And that's what I consider a finished coat of primer. So let's get to the spray booth. Let's get this down, all done in a slightly darker primer, and then we can move on to putting the color on. Okay, so turning our attentions to the interior, you can see that I've already masked off the vast majority of it with some standard frog tape, and I've masked off all the fine detail with the standard Tamiya masking tape. And to get that curve at the top, I simply put my M3 washer onto a piece of 18mm tape, went round it with a scalpel, peeled it off, and then applied that particular bit of masking to the top of the seat. So what we're going to do now is we're just going to spray up this strip here in like a creamy white, and then peel it off and then paint up the driver in some Warhammer colours, and then we'll turn our attentions to painting the driver's head as well. Right, let's hit the spray booth and get some paint on that strip. Okay, so now we've got our very light grey stripe on our interior seat. It's now time to think about painting the driver, and we'll start by painting the driver's head. Now, I don't know about you, but I always found painting flesh very difficult. My daughter, who paints Warhammer figures, showed me this great tip, and the trick is to paint the first layer of your flesh in this Cadian flesh tone, let that dry for a few hours thoroughly, and then go over it with a very thin wash of this Reichland flesh shade, or Rickland flesh shade. It's those two colours anyway, and between these two you'll get a fantastic, very passable skin tone, and it's really very easy. All you do is simply pick up a little bit of the flesh tone on your brush and just whack it all over the face any way you like. Just like that. So now we're going to leave that for a good 2 or 3 hours to really dry off, and then we'll come back for the next stage. So that's now been drying for a good few hours, and now we can put on the stain, and it's quite easy to do. You can just bang it on without any particular care in the world and move it around until you're happy with where it all is, and just whack it on like this, as thick or as thin as you like, relatively speaking, because time will do what it needs to do with it. So let's just bang it on like that. So you can see I'm going quite liberally with it, get it all in the nooks and all in the crannies, and then once we've finished we'll just move it around where we actually like it. But it will dry over time lighter than what you see. So if you just now pick out some of the stain from the heavier areas like this, you want to leave it in some of the deeper recesses, and over time it'll settle down and end up picking out all the little features. I do that, you can see there it looks relatively heavy, but it's not. You can see in his cheek he got a little bit of darkening there, and in his eyes and in his mouth most certainly, and there's a little bit too much over here, so we can remove some of that. And you don't need to go too fussy with it because you don't want to take away all of the shading. And there we are, we'll leave it like that, and then we'll come back and we'll see what it looks like in a couple of hours once it's completely dry. So it's been a few hours now and the head is fully dry, and we've now got some features looking just like this. So we've now got some really good shading and some definition. Now, I never actually paint eyes on these slot car figures. I allow that stain to do its work on the eyes, because I always think that painting model eyes, especially this small, can be more trouble than it's worth and don't always get the right look we're after. 24th scale you can almost get away with it, but in 132 I think sometimes it's worth just leaving the eyes darker for the right sort of effect. Now, the last stage for painting skin tone is to dry brush the original skin tone colour back over the high points of the face. So we just take up a little bit of paint and wipe most of it off of your brush, and then we just gently go over the surface and just put some of that paint back in the area that the stain is the most strong. And there we are. So that is perfectly acceptable. Once that dries, that'll look absolutely fine. So let's move on. So you've just seen me cut out the window and the interior, and it's very important to note that when cutting out the window and the interior, all you need to do is take away the uneven bases that are on those two components. You don't need to take away anything from the sides. In fact, we want all of those sides. Okay, so now the interior is ready to go, we need to turn our attentions back to mounting the body on the chassis. Okay, so before we can mount the chassis to the body, it's important to note there's a very small moulding pit on the back of the chassis just here, and that needs to come off before we can put the chassis into the body. Otherwise that pip just interferes with the fitment in the resin shell. So with that simply removed with a scalpel, we can now go ahead and place the chassis into the body, making sure that that back end is pushed up nice and tight. And as you can see, we've got two holes already drilled here, and they were simply transferred through with my drill as I was painting it to get the painting done. So that is a very easy process to do there. Now, to get the front end in the right place, we need to just settle down the wheels in the right place like this on the adjustable chassis, making sure that both sides are within the wheel arch nicely. And then move the guide, take a toothpick, put a little bit of paint on the end of the toothpick, and then go into the mounting hole and just rotate the toothpick around to transfer the paint. When you remove the body, you'll have the mounting point exactly located where it needs to be. And then with your 2mm drill, just go in there, just do a couple of turns just to make sure that you get the hole in exactly the right place. And then once you're happy that you've got the hole in exactly the right place, so you end up with a little ring of black just like that, then you can go in and drill about 6mm or 1/4 inch into the resin. Just like that, about 1/4 inch. Once you've done that, you are then free to screw the body to the chassis for the first time and make sure that your alignment is correct. Just like that. And as you can see, the front wheel should fall exactly in the correct place within the arch. Once you've done that, you can then adjust these adjusting screws to get the front axle in exactly the right place, so that when the whole car sits down on the chassis, you've got exactly the right amount of clearance and you've got exactly the right amount of wheel movement. You don't want the wheel movement to go up, you just want it to gently sit on the setup plate so that the wheel is supporting the front corners of the car. And as you can see, we're pretty much there now. I just need to take away some of that vertical movement, and that will require the body coming off and coming back on again, just to double check each time you adjust the screws. But once you've got your body fitting correctly to the chassis, we can move on to the next stage. So when you've finished setting up your front axle, you should end up with the front wheels and the rear wheels all nicely seated in the arches evenly, and the front wheels touching the setup plate just. And then if you hold the setup plate like this and move those front tires, they should just about rotate ever so gently without any real resistance, but also the wheels should have no vertical movement, so it's supporting the front of the car properly. So once you've done that, we can then move on to finishing the body, and the first job that involves is painting the inside of the body with a little bit of matte paint. Now when you're painting the interior of this body, it's important not to paint the sides of it, because we're going to be sticking the interior to the sides. So paint the whole of the interior and then just leave this section here between the bottom of the window and the top of that Retropower logo there. Try and leave most of that clear, because we're going to need that in a minute when we glue in the interior. Right, so let's get to painting. And when you've finished painting your body, you should end up with an interior looking very similar to that, with an unpainted panel here and an unpainted panel on the other side. Right, so the next step that we need to do really before we can progress is get the door mirrors in. And for that, we're going to need to drill in 2 holes. So I'm starting off here with a 1mm drill, and I just drilled a hole right in the corner of that A pillar there. And I'll do the same on the other side, like that. And then I'm going to change over to a 1.7mm drill, and I'm going to open up those holes, but very light pressure, almost nothing, and let the drill do all the work and just let it slowly drill through the resin. should end up with 2 holes, one there and one there. Now it could be argued that you should do that before you paint the body. So if you're watching this video having not bought the kit, you might want to consider doing that step before you paint your body. But if you do it with the body unpainted, when you paint the body, you're going to have to clear those holes out anyway. So I just prefer to do it at this later stage. Right, as you can see, I have painted the rear view mirrors and I pre-glued them on the sprue that came from the wheels. So now they're painted, all I need to do now is nip them off, and I should just be able to push them into those holes in the body without too much trouble. But if there's a little bit of resistance, you might need to wiggle those holes and open them up a little bit more. Now a quick note, these rear view door mirrors have a bottom of a left and a right, and the bottom is relatively flat. Hopefully you can see the bottom there is reasonably flat and there's a little bit of a dome to the top. Now that means that this particular one goes on the passenger side. So we just push him in, and it's a little bit tight, so we can just ream him out with the drill until he's a nice, reasonably easy fit. And then once it's fitting nicely, we could put a little spot of glue on the inside to fix the mirror in place. And there are the wing mirrors all pushed into place. So once they're done, you can simply nip off the excess on the inside of the body with a pair of smooth fitting pliers. And then if you take a scalpel blade, put a spot of glue on the end of it, you can then glue the mirrors on in place once you're finished. And that concludes the fitting of the door mirrors. Now we can move on to fitting the glass. Now there's 2 ways to fit the glass. One is to cut a hole in the top of the glass and then put some silver foil tape on the inside of the roof of the glass. And the silver foil tape that I use is this stuff here. It's just for silver insulation foam boards you can buy in any DIY store. So that's one way of putting the glass in, with a big square in the top. But my particular method that I like to use is to leave the glass in this particular kit loose, and I fit my silver foil tape to the inside of the actual interior, because the interior is designed to hold the glass on this particular kit. So you've got the wide screen there which goes in the front. You can simply drop that into the body, and then your interior here simply drops on top of that, and that all fits in very, very nicely. As you can see from the other side there, it all fits in exactly where it should do. And then you get your silver foil tape and you put your tape on the inside of the interior just like that, and then I like to wipe it down with a cotton earbud and push it into place. So let's do that now, and I'll show you how that's done. And once you've finished fitting your glass and interior, it should look very similar to that, and the foil tape should look similar to that in your painted shell. Right, so now we've done the body, we now need to turn our attentions to fitting the wheel centers. Now as you can see, I've pre-painted these along with the body, and they're still on their sprue exactly as they came. So all you need to do to fit these wheel centers is nip them off the sprue. Now I've deliberately made these wheel centers a little bit bigger than the wheel, because I do like a nice tight fit on the center rather than having to rely on the glue to fit the center. So all you'll need to do is file off the pip from the sprue, and then just gently run round a file with a file, or perhaps a little bit of sandpaper, and just gently take off any paint that may be on the edge of your wheel insert, and just remove a little tiny bit of resin just to reduce that size down. It really isn't much, we're talking fractions. And once you're happy that you've taken off a nice even amount of resin all around the edge, you're then free to try it in a wheel. And you're looking for a nice tight fit. See, I've barely taken anything off and that's almost there. So another couple of goes around with the file You should be able to push that wheel nice and tight into the wheel. If you do manage to overfile and it's a bit loose, all you need to do is put a spot of glue on the inside of the wheel, and then you can push the inserts in that way. And once you've finished filing your wheel insert, you should find that it'll fit inside the wheel just like that, with a little bit of a creak and a little bit of a push. And you want to sink the wheel insert just about 0.5 millimeter beyond the alloy rim of the wheel itself. And there we are. So just rinse and repeat on the other 3 wheels. And when you've got all your inserts in, you should end up with a chassis looking just like that. Very, very smart. Right, okay, so that takes care of the chassis. The last job to do on this body is just fitting in the headlights. Now for this, I like to use a very fine fiberglass pen. This is about 2 millimeters in diameter, but you could just use a little bit of sandpaper if you're careful. And all you want to do is go inside these recess pockets here and just scuff up the lacquer or the paint, whatever finish you've got, just to give yourself a little bit of a key on the inside of those recesses. And these are very good design because it means it holds the glue behind the light, but you don't have any excess squeeze out around the light. So there we are. So you just take off a little bit like that, and on the back of your lights here, you want to scratch off a little bit of that chrome, or at least scuff it up. Don't need to go mad, just like that. And then with your flush cutters, get right up against and then just nip off the sprue just like that. Now it is worthy of note that these little lights have got a little bit of a detail inside there, so make sure that you get the detail matching on both sides. You'll see a little line with some little rays coming out of it. I'm not sure if that's really showing on camera, but you'll see it in real life. There's actually a difference in the design inside those lights, so just keep an eye on that. So the next thing that I like to do is get something heavy. So I'm back to my foil tape. It's a really heavy roll, and that means then that I can mount the body just like that, so it stands up on its own. Then I'm going to get some 2-part epoxy, and I'm going to mix it up, and I'm going to put a tiny dot in the inside. Whoops, let's put that there for a minute. There we are. So put a little tiny dot of epoxy on the inside of those little pockets, just ever so slightly proud of the surface, almost nothing, but just so that it grabs the back of those lights and squeezes out. So let's mix up some epoxy and get these lights glued on. And when the glue is dry, you'll end up with a pair of headlights that look exactly like that. So the only thing that's left to do now is to screw this body to the chassis. Now, talking of chassis, I'd like to take a moment to show you this. Now, if you don't want a slot car version of this car, then Pendle Slot Racing and Retropower can offer you a static model version, including this 3D printed chassis. As you can see, it has no allowances for any running gear, so you can make this model as a static model only. It has a fantastically textured bottom surface and the nice Retropower logo on the inside, and also 8 adjusting points so you can get the axle exactly where you want it. Right, so let's get on. Let's get this body screwed to the chassis, and then we can go and hit the track.
On the subject of minor threat, I have something very, very cool to show you. A little while ago, a chap named Rob Bushell approached me. He goes by the name Swift Slots, and he does awesome little resin models that are frequently used for slot car builds. And he asked me if he could do a little resin model of Minor Threat, which I said yes to, of course. And he has gone away and done the molds for that, so they can produce these little Minor Threat slot car models, which look absolutely awesome. Now, further to that, he also then offered to come down here, set up some Scalextrics. Well, I shouldn't say Scalextrics, that's a brand name. No, bad. It's slot car racing tracks down in the den, so the guys could all go down there and basically abuse each other whilst trying to set hot laps in this Morris Minor slot car, which we did. And the challenge was laid down that we would have to set a time for 7 laps. Everybody took it in turns. And of course, Gibbo, because he's the most competitive man in the world, did indeed win. But let's see how that went.
There's nothing new there. What do you want to do?
I'm going to start again. I'm getting the spare car. All the time.
Penalty!
You have to take the Honda Legend round now because you've crashed the problem.
Front end's burnt.
It's got a weight balance penalty.
My axle's broke.
Engine mounts have come off.
Get in the zone.
I'm going to win this. I'm going to take it on. If I don't, someone cheated. All right.
What?
Everyone put it down a bit. Get used to it.
Rolling lap.
Oh, my fingers are going. I'm nervous.
Start, steady.
Gibbo's still got it.
66.79.
Speech!
I said I was going to win.
Call tip next.
Like a very number drain pipe.
That was pretty awesome, and very excitingly, I can say that if you want to buy that kit to build your own Minor Threat slot car, if you go to Pendle Slot's website, I'll put the link down below, you can buy that kit. Now it is a kit that requires assembly and it's unpainted. However, if you would like that kit to be built and painted by someone who's very capable of doing so, then go and see Rob, Swift Slots, and I will also put the link to his website down below, and most importantly his YouTube channel, because he has a very cool YouTube channel where he covers all of these little scale model builds and a lot of slot car racing stuff, so the link for that's down below as well.
And there you are, the birth of the Retropower Project Minor Threat as a slot car. And I have to give a huge thank you to Pendle Slot Racing and for Retropower themselves for allowing me to do this project, because it is a little bit of a risk and no one really knows. It's a big commitment for everybody to take on a slot car as a kit, because they're a little bit niche and it's a little bit of an unknown. So thank you very, very much. And also thank you for Retropower for allowing me to come to your workshop, take up some of your time and allow me to set up my tracks. I had an absolute blast watching you lot absolutely hammer your car, and congratulations to the winner. Very well done. It was a great, great day. So if you want a Project Minor kit of your own, you can buy them direct from Pendle Slot Racing, link below. And if you'd like me to make you your kit, also link below. And if you have any other questions about building your Project Minor Threat, you can contact Pendle Slot Racing using the email at the top of their website. So again, thank you very much to Pendle and thank you very much to Retropower, and I hope you guys have enjoyed watching this very special episode of Swift Slots. So if you've enjoyed this content, maybe you'll subscribe, and if you could hit the little bell button, that would be awesome. So until the next time, thank you very much.